But Have Gavel Will Travel is really for all ages, any community groups. We're a huge hit with scout troops, different community associations, and we can cover any topic that's timely. So I'm more than happy to link everything in the chat function. And if you're involved with a community group, we'd love to send a judge or magistrate your way.
Thank you, Nicole. Thanks for the introduction. I'm Ron Cable, the Administrative Judge at the Akron Municipal Court, also founder of RAHAB program, which helps victims of human trafficking. And, we recently became a certified court. We hold bi-weekly court sessions and offer the women that we've identified. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later. Wraparound services. So we actually had Rise today, and it was a really good session. Always look forward to it. The people in our program, they really are a phenomenal group of folks who have been through a lot and are true survivors. Michaela is the program coordinator for Rise, does a fantastic job, and she's going to talk a little bit. She put a brief PowerPoint together about red flags for human trafficking. She's going to talk a little bit about that. And, I think, I could speak for all of us. We'd be happy to answer your questions. So it's a small group. So if you have a question, raise your hand and we'll do the best we can to answer that question for you.
Yeah, hi. So like Judge Cable said, my name is Michaela Yerse. I'm the coordinator for the RISE program. And yeah, we're going to go through a quick presentation just to kind of give some basic knowledge on what human trafficking is and some kind of things to look for as far as red flags, but also, that it's not super clear cut, just like a checklist, but just to get everyone kind of that same base level knowledge. We also have Suzanne is here with us as well from RAHAB. I don't know if you want to introduce yourself and explain RAHAB real quick.
Yeah, thanks for letting me tag along. We are so thankful for Rise Court and to be able to partner with you all in providing services. Today is actually my 3-year anniversary as CEO of RAHAB. It's flown by in some ways, and there's been so much that's happened in that time too. Before that, I served 10 years as an FBI agent investigating human trafficking. So I'll probably speak from both perspectives. But what I found in law enforcement was we would encounter these victims, survivors, as you said, Judge, and there was such a need for services, that identification and removing from situations wasn't enough. And that's really what solidified my call, and I do believe it was a calling to RAHAB. RAHAB is approaching its 20th year and provides mentoring services and drop-in centers and safe housing. We do outreach where we try to go to all of the places where somebody who's trafficked might be. And then we have different spaces where we invite women and children in to just be with us in real relationship. And I can talk a little more about that probably as we go along. But filling is the vulnerabilities that traffickers prey on. RAHAB offers an alternative to that false relationship that traffickers offer to enslave.
So thank you. So yeah, without further ado, I guess we'll get started here. So we're here to talk about this big scary thing called human trafficking, right? But there's a lot of misconceptions about what that actually is and what that actually means. So human trafficking, with the most broad definition, really is used as some source of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain some type of labor or commercial sex act. A lot of times I think that, people think that human trafficking crosses state borders or across, people shipped off to different places, and it's not commonly actually the case. A lot of times this is happening, the house next door. This is, boyfriends, parents, aunts, uncles. It's really everywhere. So the use of force, fraud, or coercion is really the most important part of this definition. So again, it's not always that there's physical force used. It's not, always threatening someone's life, do this or this is going to happen to you. Oftentimes we see it's someone that is trusted, that a victim is trafficked by. Like I said, a lot of times a boyfriend, we call it grooming. They'll, get them to fall in love with you. And, a lot of times addiction plays a part in that. And eventually you just feel, this sense of loyalty to your trafficker and like they're doing what's best for you. We've seen, things like, hey, I love you so much and I want to give you a better life. And if you loved me too, then you would do this for a couple extra dollars, and kind of different things like that to start out with. And that's that fraud and coercion playing a big part. Sex trafficking specifically is a form of modern day slavery where individuals are forced through force, fraud, or coercion to perform some sort of commercial sex act, which is any sex act that is performed for money. An important fact is that minors, force, fraud, and coercion doesn't need to be present because they're minors. If you are trafficking someone or exploiting someone under the age of 18, that is human trafficking, no questions asked about it, because they're not of legal age to consent to anything that's going on. And Suzanne, feel free to jump in anywhere if you have any comments on this. I'm just kind of hopping through before getting to questions and stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess one thing, since you invited me, that I was
yeah, go anytime.
Commercial sex act, like that can be anything of value under the law, anything of value. And so I used to say, and it's crazy, but this actually happens, like it could potentially feasibly be an ice cream cone. It could be like, what is something of value that is exchanged? Like, think what would be appealing to a child. I saw some crazy stuff in my time in the FBI. So when we think about commercial sex act, it's a person's being treated as a commodity.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially like you said, with minors, it's not always necessarily money that's going to be exchanged, but and that goes as well, as you move into adults. I think what we see a lot of the time in court with RISE is that it's these commercial sex acts being exchanged for drugs, for alcohol, for, your next hit. And we'll talk about in a minute how addiction plays a huge role in human trafficking and control. So I like to throw this into my presentations just because I think it really gives a good visual. This I pulled from the national hotline for human trafficking. So this is all the red spots are hot spots where they're getting calls from. So different tips about human trafficking, traffickers, red flags, different things like that. So as you can see, Ohio is definitely a hot spot, especially kind of here in our region. It's definitely happening here too.
Yeah.
Another misconception is that traffickers are the people that pull up in the white van and they're super scary. We kind of touched on this earlier. That's not the case. A lot of times it is, do those things happen where there's kidnappings and horrible things? Absolutely, those things happen, but not as common as people think that they do.
Yeah, this is why I feel like what you guys do is so incredibly important, because obviously if it did look like that, if it looked like all those myths that go viral on social media, like your child's going to be snatched out of the shopping cart at the big box store or the big white van, those things, like people would be calling 911 immediately. They would be calling 911, but it's so much more subtle. And so it was just the way that the court is able to screen for trafficking and identify people who wouldn't otherwise be identified, I think is just such a crucial point that we need to know what to look for. And so I so appreciate that there is somebody there who is doing that and being proactive in the identification.
And I was thinking about this, I think we all have known someone or somewhere along the lines, maybe we've been in this situation, at least have known someone who's been in like a relationship that you just don't understand. Like this person is not nice enough to them. They're not good for you, but this person is just in love with them. There's some sense of control that person has, and trafficking kind of takes that on, and it's not because, you don't not like this person because they look scary or because there are these red flags, but, there's just this sense of control. and it's very, very similar in human trafficking. It's the exact same thing, actually. Someone doesn't have to look scary or be threatening someone's life to be mistreating them and to be controlling them. And the same goes for the victim or the survivor. They don't have to look all the time battered and broken, especially in the beginning phases where they're being groomed. So that's why I said a lot of times it's not as simple as a checklist, but it's very similar to a relationship that sometimes you don't understand. Like, that they deserve better, but there's that sense of control and that loyalty that has kind of been built over time.
Right. And when you think about it, when somebody's being turned out, as they say, or offered for appointments, they need to look appealing. They need to look like they're not being trafficked, right? When they go for those appointments or dates, as they can be called. And so those physical signs, the trafficker is not going to want those physical signs to be there. But it's so often as a relationship that degrades. It's that grooming. It's everything that she said, that preying on the vulnerability. And then you've probably seen the same as I have, where it may degrade to the kind of stuff that's depicted so often in the movies or in the media, but that's not how it starts out. And because it starts out a different way, there's already that trauma bond. And so it just gets to a place where, yeah, if it looked that terrible in the beginning, that person wouldn't have stayed. But because of vulnerability was preyed upon, there was grooming, and there was that degrading of relationship, or what had appeared to be relationship, over time, then it's not even noticeable to the victim.
Right. And a lot of times, maybe they do, but they think they deserve it at a certain point. It's not looked at as abuse anymore. It's kind of taken on as, well, if I would have done this, this wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a lot of guilt and shame that goes along with being a victim and a survivor.
Right.
So this is a good time now to move into these risk factors, like we were just talking about, that traffickers will exploit. So things like poverty and homelessness. A trafficker sees someone like that, and what are they going to provide to you? They're going to provide a roof over your head. It might not be the cleanest place, it might not be the best place, but they can provide that for you. A history of abuse and neglect. So you grow up maybe seeing this in the home, or this is just something that you're used to. Coming from a trafficker, this is not going to feel like a new environment. This is going to be comfortable. This is going to be what you know. Again, back to that poverty and homelessness, sort of the lack of resources. A trafficker isn't just coming at you with a gun saying you better do this. It's, well, let me provide for you. Let me care about you. I can do this. And, that's sort of them pulling them in the beginning. Lack of emotional fulfillment, especially when you're young and, looking for love, and maybe you find someone who's a little bit older than you and showing you this attention. It's really easy to fall into that trap in that sense. Sadly, learning disabilities and, any other sort of disability, is a little bit easier to manipulate, maybe again with the same sort of, let me fulfill some emotional need for you, or let me make you feel special, or explain something to you in a way that isn't actually true, but you might not know better. Lack of supervision physically and online. I think especially in these days now, traffickers have moved online. I think, even in my life, I actually coach a youth group, and they've gotten messages from older men saying, just show me some attention and I'll pay you $500 a week, which easily can turn into, complimenting and all these things. And then maybe send me a couple pictures of yourself. And before you know it, you're getting blackmailed and knee deep in something that you are so not able to understand. Low self-esteem.
And for most of the,
Sorry, Judge, go ahead.
no, that's okay. I mean, I was just going to say, for most of the victims, I mean, half the part of the battle anyway is just to, have them understand that they are a victim. Some of them do not look at themselves as victims because, they've been abused for a period of time. And they also remember what they view as positive, whatever their trafficker has done for them, be it providing, shelter and, some of the things that we've already talked about, and affection. So, we've had, some in our program that, they kind of have an idea that they're a victim, but, it's very hard for them to come out and say it or acknowledge it.
For sure. Low self-esteem, like I was saying, and then moving into a little bit, addiction plays such a huge role. I would say most, and there's been different studies that have been done, you could research this on your own, but most victims, most survivors of human trafficking have been addicted to some sort of substance at some point in time, whether that be their trafficker got them addicted or he was able to prey on that vulnerability of them already being addicted to use that as a means of control. So, if you know anything about different drugs and addictions, withdrawal symptoms are terrifying to someone who is an addict. So a lot of times it is, scarier to think about not getting your next high, not getting that next hit, than it is to think about going out on the street and, making the money for this trafficker. So he'll say things like, I'm going to let you get sick. I'm not going to let you get your next hit unless you go out and do X, Y, Z. So addiction is a huge control tactic that is used against victims. I think involvement in child welfare system, that kind of can tie into lack of supervision and not really having a positive, maybe solid role model in your life, where maybe you're bouncing around all over the place and you've never had someone to cling on to and to trust. So if someone comes along and says, I'm going to be that person for you, again, really easy to kind of fall into that trap. And then this is something that, again, I really can't stress this enough. There are definitely some common red flags that we see as far as like in the courtroom, things that we've noticed and that, are kind of similar patterns across the victims and survivors that we serve. But it is not as simple as a checklist of, things like, oh, yep, she looks like this, she has this and that, or he, because human trafficking definitely does not discriminate on gender. RISE specifically, we are dealing with mostly women, so I will refer that way. But it's not a checklist that we just go through. So I just want to stress that before we kind of move into the different red flags. So these are a bunch of different things that we might see. And these can be changes in behavior as well from someone who you knew, maybe was being trafficked, and this is a shift into this kind of behavior. So aggressive or hostile behavior, there's typically a lack of trust, especially in different systems like the courts and the police and different agencies. Secretive behavior, like I said, there's a lot of shame and guilt that is, connected with living this lifestyle, living the life. So being secretive is definitely a part of it, especially in minors, unexplained monetary and bank transactions. I worked at an agency called Victim Assistance Program before. I was working with the RISE program full time, and I had a mother call me saying that her daughter was getting these huge sums of money in her account and then they'd be gone the next day. And she would be out late and she was really tired all the time. And, lots of these things were red flags to me. And it turned out that she had been dating this new guy who was a little bit older, and she was making this money for him and then dumping it into his account. So especially in minors, I think the unexplained monetary transactions is a big one. Expensive gifts from maybe a boyfriend, an uncle, a mom, whoever who's trying to, groom this person. Like, I'm more tired during the day. Being super anxious, depressed, and submissive or fearful. Sorry. Definitely, sorry, there's a bunch of little kids running around here. But I think coming into court, we've seen women, especially like I said, with that distrust, they come in and they're really quiet. They're sitting in the corner. They don't want to say anything because they're afraid of that being used against them later. They're afraid of their trafficker finding out and them getting in trouble. So that's a big one. We see in the court a lot, someone coming with a victim or a survivor, and they're trying to speak on their behalf. So we've had a woman come in with her quote unquote boyfriend, and he was trying to say everything for her, and he was in charge of her ID and her documents and things like that. So he was really trying to control what the courts were thinking and wanting to make sure that when she left, she was going with him and nowhere else. So that was definitely a sign of red flag that we noticed. Again, signs of addiction, drug and alcohol use, poor hygiene and malnourishment or fatigue. That's sort of up and down, like we just talked about. They don't always look like they're battered and beaten and living out of, poor conditions. Sometimes they look really made up, and other times you can tell that they've been thrown aside in, a house where a lot of drugs are around the whole time. So it's, again, kind of context clues and different things, not just a checklist. And then, like I mentioned, not being in control of their own identification documents is huge. It's really, really common in what we've seen.
And I'll say, you know, these are some things to look for, but I mean, identification gets a little bit tricky because, you know, I've had, we've identified some victims that really, what I've noticed about them is, you know, they almost, I mean, I guess it's a little easier for me because I've been in the court system for so long, but they almost look like a victim of domestic violence. And then, you know, I look at their record and they have, you know, all these different things that really don't seem to, it raises suspicions. You know, they'll have, you know, drug charges on there, things like theft. And, you know, it's a lot easier, obviously, if they have a former charge or conviction of prostitution or solicitation. But, you know, all these things together at least gives us the ability to screen to see whether or not, you know, somebody, that person, you know, may be a victim. You know, I'll tell you, there have been a few times where I thought for sure this is probably a victim of human trafficking. I've had, you know, the older person that you know, controlling the situation, that, you know, you know, female says, well, that's my uncle and I don't have an address, but, you know, she's kind of well manicured for being homeless. And you know, really it just ended up that, you know, it wasn't a human trafficking situation. It was an odd situation, but not a human trafficking situation. So anyway, you know, we don't obviously screen every single woman that comes in and has, you know, some type of criminal charge, but, you know, we take a look at all these things and a whole lot more. And if something doesn't seem to fit, you know, we will at least have them, you know, meet with our probation officer, Michaela, to go through the screening tool to see if there might be a problem there.
There you go. So I put the power control wheel on here for anyone to kind of take a look at. Lots of different control tactics. Like I talked about, physical abuse, sexual abuse, that is just one spoke of the wheel. That's just one little part of it. So there's a lot of other things that you can kind of use as a means of control. Different emotional abuse, isolation from family and friends, minimizing, blaming, denying, that gaslighting for, you know, emotional abuse is huge. Using privilege, I think, is something a lot of times that we see with minors. Maybe it's an uncle or someone in a position of power. But yeah, a whole bunch of other things here to look at. I wanted to, unless Judge or Susan, if you guys have anything else to add before we kind of open the floor to some questions, maybe in the chat or just shout it out. I don't know.
I think we could take some questions. If not, you know, we could talk a little bit more about, you know, how RAHAB and RISE help the victims.
I did want to say too, I put my contact information in the chat. So if anyone ever has RISE related questions or anything related to human trafficking that you had concerns about, feel free to reach out to me anytime.
Yeah, and I can put RAHAB's information in there too.
Yeah, if anyone has questions, feel free to throw it in the chat too.
Well, I can tell you a question that I've received a lot, and I'm sure you have too, is like, where is the place where my child is most at risk for sex trafficking? And you touched on that earlier. Like, people always want to know the hot spots, but I'm interested in what you're seeing, but especially for juveniles, it tends to be online. Traffickers go where kids go. It tends to be online, and kids with their social media post so much that a trafficker can go on, and it's like shopping online. They can just scroll through and find vulnerabilities and then pose as the solution to those vulnerabilities. And so kids are particularly at risk in a time where they've been more isolated. That's one of the risk factors that, you know, you see in the presentation, when they're more isolated and they're spending that time online. And so I'll put our website and email in the chat. RAHAB has a resource about specifically that, keeping kids safe, if that would be helpful to anyone. I don't know if anyone's in education, or we're trying to distribute that as broadly as possible to equip It applies to adults too, but specifically to equip anyone who might be in a place where they have a child they care about and want to prevent vulnerabilities.
Yeah, I definitely always stress to especially the kids that I coach and people that I know that keeping your accounts private is really important. And so often it just starts as a comment maybe online, you know? So like complimenting and different things like that, again, to gain that trust. So if you don't know a person, make sure that they're not following you. Super important.
I have a question. As community members or organizations, are there things that we could look at as either business owners or, even the library? Do you know what I mean? Like, what does somebody that is being trafficked look like? I know that's going to be hard to identify, but in the past, some things that I've heard about through my hairdresser was that she had a man come in with 3 women and they were all getting their hair done. So she went through classes and identified that that's very uncommon for one man to come in with 3 women and they're either getting their hair done or their nails done. Is that true or is it not true?
I'm sorry, I'm laughing. I'm not laughing at your question. I'm just thinking I have 4 daughters, so that could be my husband taking them to get
Right. Right.
But yeah, I mean, it's so often, it's not the thing you can necessarily define, but when you feel, I'll say sometimes like the hairs on the back of the back of your neck stand up, like you just feel like something isn't right. You don't have to know for sure that it's a trafficking situation to 1, call law enforcement, or 2, if you're in a business situation, if you're in a medical place, like somewhere where these people are coming in with appointments and there's identified information, or you're in a position to have a conversation, it's not always the giant thing that's going to save somebody. It's the small little things. I used to say, as an FBI agent, I used to share this YouTube video by the ladies Kim Meter. It's How a Smile Saved a Life. It's seeing a person, because remember, the vulnerabilities are that need for affection, and sometimes just giving people the smallest sign of hope and then opening the door for conversation. You don't know what they may tell you just in the course of trying to have that conversation. And there may be red flag indicators they don't have to disclose as a trafficking victim in order to make that call to law enforcement or get them help, or to show them that there are people who see them. And so all of those things, connected together may be what eventually gets them out of that situation. But I had a case that was prosecuted in federal court, federal conviction. My victim never disclosed specifically as a human trafficking victim, never used those words.
I can say, I think a lot of times it's a string of different red flags, so it's, he came in with these 3 women, he won't leave while they're getting their hair done. He's sitting here listening to the conversations. He's paying for maybe, this one with different cards, or, they won't really say a whole lot. They keep looking over their shoulder. It's kind of a collection of different things. So just, one thing in particular might not raise a whole lot of flags, but as a collective, and yeah, if you have that gut feeling, a lot of times you're right,
And this, of course, isn't always the situation, but when I've had the trafficker actually come to court, it's usually a situation where, you do have a younger woman and an older man, but they just don't look like, they should be around each other. I mean, a lot of times, a couple of times anyway, the woman looked really tired and worn out, and really just like an abused person, like somebody that's really been through a lot. And the guy looked fine. But he wanted to speak for her, and he'd sit in the back and he would get aggressive with my bailiff when I wasn't around. And some of you may be wondering, well, if the trafficker's in the courtroom, why doesn't the judge do something about it? Well, there's really not a whole lot that I can do except for report it, because I'm not allowed to arrest somebody or investigate. So here I am. I have this victim in court, and I have, who I believe to be the trafficker, no solid evidence of it, but something I'd probably bet the farm on. And, we've had to do things like I've had to switch courtrooms with other judges because that trafficker will look to see, when the next hearing date is, especially if the victim / defendant is incarcerated, and will show up and will try to make bond. The reason why he would try to make bond would be so, he could get her back under his control. So there's all kinds of situations, but when something really doesn't seem like it fits, and, there's more than just, well, this is odd, there's nothing wrong with calling and reporting that. You could be, potentially saving somebody's life. So.
Yeah, and what can be frustrating about that, if you are the business owner or the person in the community who's reporting it, is you may not see results because we have a system where beyond a reasonable doubt is the standard for a conviction. However, it's, again, all of those little things. And so that case that I was referring to with the victim who didn't know that she was a victim of trafficking, there were over 100 interactions with law enforcement. Nobody ever reported human trafficking, but it was all of the things, the culmination of those pieces that we were able to put together. So you may never know the impact of the action that you took, but it doesn't mean that there wasn't something that came of it. I would also say you can refer people to RAHAB and to our programs, and especially to our drop-in, to connect them if they are in need of. We don't require them to identify as being trafficked to come in and receive services, and they'll receive, if they need hygiene items. We sit down for meals and establish relationships, real relationships that counteract the false version that traffickers offer. And so, again, they don't need to disclose as a victim. So often we have women who come in who are part of that community who I can see that they have been trafficked. They don't necessarily see it, and they don't have to see it in order to receive services. So that's an option as well.
I do just want to say too, a lot of times, the women, obviously they're coming through RISE, they are defendants through the criminal court system, and this is a diversion program. So rather than just convicting them of a crime that they committed because they were under duress and being trafficked, we're kind of giving them that alternate route. And we do get referrals. We work closely with RAHAB, and, if there's a warrant or something that happens, we have a relationship to where we can then help them out. They've built a relationship with RAHAB and the wonderful people that they have over there. So it's been really, really great to get to work with them and have that relationship to where we can then help them out with this other, the criminal side of things.
Thank you, Michaela.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we are very fortunate to have RAHAB as a partner, and we have, several community partners to help, the women that we've identified. And it's a long haul for them. I mean, I don't want it to sound like, this person wants saved and we find them and, brush them off a little bit and they go back out into the community and they're fine. It's a very long healing process. And it's very painful for them to go and speak about, their trauma with their trauma counselor. It's very hard for them, to leave their family situation. A lot of times it's their family who's gotten them into this whole life in the first place. So it is a long process, but the good news is, I mean, what I see happening, and I wish that, every single one of them were as resilient as, a core group that we have in RISE, but, sometimes, they make big mistakes, even though they're on probation, so to speak, and they're getting all these services, and we want nothing more for them than, to do well. But it takes a lot of patience. And, I remember when I first started this, we would have these highs and lows because we would have a couple that were doing real well, and then, they'd vanish for a while. And, truthfully, we worry about them because, life out on the streets is very dangerous. We've already lost a couple of the members of our group that have passed away due to overdose or illness. And we recently had somebody that was inflicted with a gunshot wound that was actually doing quite well, but decided to go visit some people that she shouldn't have been around one night, and it just kind of happened, which is, not good. But we have some that are really, really doing well, and they seem to have kept on the straight and narrow, so to speak. They work really hard at their drug rehabilitation programs, and they work really hard at their trauma counseling. And I'll tell you, we had at least 3 today that, I mean, they're just doing phenomenal. I mean, just really working through it, and they really have started to come to the court when they're in crisis or really in need of help. We have a couple of probation officers, and of course, Michaela, I can't speak to them directly because, I'm the judge, but, they're able to call the others at any time. Well, maybe not at any time, even though sometimes they do call in the middle of the night and things like that. But anyway, just refreshing to see that they look at the court as a safe place and not as a place to be afraid of or suspicious of. And, for a lot of them, we're the only people that have really shown them kindness over the years, because I think that even the ones that have gotten in a little bit of trouble for, performing sex acts for money have really, as I think it's a group that, society has kind of shunned. And for most of them, it's really not their fault. As you saw in the presentation, most of them were put out there by somebody when they were kids. So I think it's definitely a just cause, and I think that the work is truly important.
Yeah, I couldn't echo that enough. I mean, the women that I've had the opportunity to come to know are extraordinary. I think that all of us are put here and created with a purpose. And one thing I know for sure from the work that we do and the places that I've been in my life, the cases I investigate, is that evil is a real thing. It is a force. And I believe evil works the hardest to destroy and devour those who are put on this earth to do the most good, who have the most potential. And so we see these girls and these women who have been through such extraordinary, horrific trauma, who had vulnerabilities. It could have been any one of us. We all have vulnerabilities. And just to come alongside them and for someone to see them for who they truly are, not what's been done to them, but who they are, and to offer them hope. They truly can rise. They can rise to fulfill their potential, not just survive. But I really believe these women have the power to change the world. We just need to give their voices back. And it takes a community to do that. It's not one person, it's not one entity. Traffickers have networks to surround victims, and communities need those too. And so RAHAB has a continuum of care. We can't do it alone. We need the community to link arms with us, and we need the court to be part of that. And we need other organizations, groups, communities of faith to join with us. Whether it's what you're doing right now, all of you who are part of this, having the conversation and speaking the truth about trafficking. I always say evil's greatest weapon is deception. And there's a lot of misinformation out there about trafficking. So even just creating the forum to speak what is true about those who have been trafficked, about what trafficking looks like, we're combating those lies. That's fighting trafficking. And for these women to be able to come into a courtroom and to be offered hope in that place, which is probably where they last expect to find it, is extraordinary. And I'm so grateful.
And I'll tell you something too, on another positive note. It's really refreshing to see. I mean, I wish I could say that, all people were good. I can't say that. And I certainly can't say that all criminal defendants are good people with good intentions. But, the women in RISE, every single one of them, even though they've had all these issues, due to their trauma and everything else that they've gone through, are to the heart just good people. So, you know, it's really something, and some of them have kind of been supporting each other. You know, most of them don't have any friends. They don't have much of a family, if any, and you know, they're really really alone. But then, you know, I announced a couple of weeks ago that we were coming back today, and believe it or not, in person, because we've been meeting over Zoom because of the pandemic. And they were also excited because they come in, and, you know, it's little things too that, you know, make them feel appreciated and happy, just like with all of us. You know, we get them something for lunch, and you know, they have, you know, Michaela does a nice job and a lot of the stuff she gets is from RAHAB as well. They have a drop-in center, and we're able to offer that to them. But, you know, they get little trinkets, you know, just things like toiletry, and you know, we have received a lot of donations like clothes and so forth. You know, today, our youngest in the program is 19, and she was 18 when, you know, she first started. And, you know, she's really ready to go back to work. She's a very hard worker. You know, over the winter, she was walking around with a snow shovel, you know, shoveling people's driveways for money. And really, if you met her, you would just think she was you know, you wouldn't know what had happened to her. I mean, you know, she just looks like, you know, anybody else, a typical young lady that, you know, is kind of fiery and everything else. But, you know, she's really ready to go back out into the workforce, and is making some positive steps. And even though, you know, they all struggle to a certain extent. I mean, it was kind of nice that she came in today and was able to get some clothes for her interviews and things like that. And she left, she was, you know, really happy and in a positive, had a real positive attitude about the whole thing, about, you know, going and finding legitimate work. So anyway, you know, I just guess I can't say enough positive things about them, because, you know, I mean, I just don't know if I had to suffer that kind of trauma personally, if I would be able, you know, to be as courageous as the people who come in front of me in my court. So it's, you know, it's really could be touching at times. And, you know, I'm glad to be able to do this work, for sure.
Does anyone have any questions? Oh, there's a question in the chat. It
Yeah,
says, do you see it, Ron?
Yes, I do. It says, does your program help the ladies find employment to get back in the workforce? Yes, we do. We have, you know, several partners. We have case management services, and we will try to help them, you know, find work, and have been successful at that. You know, it's like anything else. You know, we offer all these things, and it's, you know, we tell them about it all the time, and that, you know, there are some definite requirements. You know, going to trauma therapy is definitely a requirement. Being sober is a requirement, but you know, some of them, like you know, the young lady we had today, you know, we connected her with the case worker that could help her look for jobs, but you know, she almost seemed to want to do it on her own. But we're going to try to help her with that, because she definitely has some potential. She's a go-getter. So, but yes, we do offer that service. Housing could be a big thing. You know, again, sometimes it's hard to get them to leave their current situation, which in most cases is not a good situation. But the ones that do, you know, we've been able to help with housing through case management services. And you know, one woman in particular, you know, she got her own place for the first time ever, you know, maybe about 6 months ago. And you know, she's been up and down a little bit lately, but she still has her apartment, and you know, that's all she ever wanted was her own place. So she does have that. And then, you know, sometimes we've, you know, had women stay for a period of time, and you know, the battered women's shelter. We've had some that have been fortunate enough to go and stay at RAHAB in their safe housing for a while. And we've had, you know, several of our women have gone through the sober living. So, you know, they went from IBH, which is an in-house treatment program for drugs, into sober living. Probably the person who's going to graduate first has finished sober living several months ago and now has her own apartment. think there was another question, but I can't find it. Maybe not.
Is their conviction waivable from their criminal record if they go through the different programs?
Yes, actually, not. We have different tracks to our program depending on what the needs are. The city prosecutor's office was really helpful and worked with us because, you know, we need their blessing, not to run the program, but to, you know, to agree to say, okay, you know, we'll make this a diversion program, et cetera. And they were very cooperative. And they all have the right to counsel. So when they do enter the program, they have their own attorney who will tell them the pros and cons. Of course, I think they're almost all pros, but you know, basically, we do have some as in lieu of conviction. So for some of the women in the program, they're on their first offense, so they don't need any expungement of other records. So basically, you know, they'll do the in lieu of conviction, and I'll just wipe away the you know, the conviction as long as they graduate from the program. We have another track because Ohio has an expungement law, and basically people who have been trafficked are entitled to expungement of all of their criminal record, except for, you know, maybe a few offenses like murder or higher degree felonies that involve children. We haven't had anybody like that, but they're entitled to expungement of all their record that relates to the trafficking. So the University of Akron has an expungement clinic, and the professor over there has been really fantastic about women who are at the end of the program to sit down with them and to, you know, try to figure out how they're going to clean their record up so they could go on with their lives, which is really a phenomenal service because the victim actually gets, you know, her own lawyer. And, you know, the charges in front of me are easy, but sometimes they have stuff all over the state. You know, there's not a whole lot I could do if they have an out-of-state record, but the in-state record, we could certainly do something about that. And we had our first person who actually is close to graduation, and we connected her with the law clinic and the professor, and her assistant came over because one requirement that they have and one requirement that we have is, you know, the victim has to tell her story at the end. And the professor needs it because that story needs to be told in order to expunge the record. So anyway, she was able to do that, and they're working on her case now. There is one thing that, you know, I think is kind of interesting that we're doing is the prosecutor's office has agreed to amend the charge, whatever it may be, at the end of the program to solicitation or prostitution, because unfortunately those charges are gateway offenses that are needed in order to expunge the record. And of course, we know that they were all engaged in that. So, but yes, you know, we're able to help them with their record tremendously.
All right. Well, thank you so much for all of you for participating. It's a hard topic, but I think it's well worth getting the information out to everyone.
Well, thank you all for having us. And if you have any questions, you know, please go ahead. And I think Michaela gave you the court's information. We'd always be happy to answer your questions or, you know, speak at any event where somebody's interested in listening. So I appreciate the opportunity. I do. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for attending tonight.